was worried about that. I thought, you know, a man of his
That would have been
experience.
such a good way to end the whole thing, wouldn't it? I'd step up and go straight over the back with the ambulance coming.
Well, how fantastic to see you all. Brian hasn't seen this many of one of his movies in this long, really. That's pretty extraordinary, isn't it?
What's that?
The numbers that we've got here, sorry, you follow? The numbers that we've got here.
I know, it's actually overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I walked in here and I just saw all these ladies, excuse me fellas, there's not a lot of you. And I saw all these ladies and I was just like, well, I hope they're entertaining.
It's an incredible privilege for me to be here and a pleasure to be here and spend some time with Brian. I mean, just before we do, I'd just like to do what I think we should do at all great Australian events, which is acknowledge the land on which we meet today and the traditional owners, in this case the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. 60,000-year history we all share. But to continue to spend some time with Brian is always an enormous pleasure. I first met Brian. At this point, I could still run, and I would run the City to Surf most years. And so a mutual friend invited Brian to join us, and he said, "Oh, Brian, I'll be coming along." I went, "Oh, fantastic! That'd be great. I haven't met Brian. That'd be wonderful." And I can see Brian coming through the crowd, and so I'm expecting a kind of "Oh, James, this is Brian. Brian, this is James. Oh, Brian, nice to meet you." That sort of stuff. Brian just walks through and goes, "You're bloody dying, Nat." Just points at my hand. Says, "You're bloody dying, Nat, right?" In fact, I don't think he said bloody either, really. But, and I'm just sort of looking at it like, I wish I'd had the wit to have to reply, but I'm also just cracking up laughing, just going, what an intro, what a fantastic way to start. And no, I'm not bloody dying.
And you've been caught out because you had died.
I never have, but just such a funny introduction, but also so perfectly in character. There's Brian, direct, blunt, immediate, funny, present. Absolutely brilliant. So since then we've met a few times.
And we did do the City to Surf.
And we did do the City to Surf.
We did the whole thing.
Yeah, we did complete it. I think we ran most of the way.
I ran the whole way.
Yeah. What was your time? Remember your time? What was your time?
Yes, I remember the time. I think it was 33 minutes. Oh no, sorry. No. It was 63 minutes. I think it was 33 minutes to get to the top of William Street, and then the other 30 to go down here.
So since then, we counted one another from time to time, and then, they send me his book, and I go, oh, that'll be interesting. And then I'm gobsmacked. I am just blown away. And people who know me will know that I don't necessarily rave just because I know you. I will sort of go, not very good this time. This book is incredible. These stories are so alive, they are so real, and it is so extraordinary to think that someone that we've enjoyed on stage and screen for decades, at this point, can suddenly be a fully fledged writer. These are writers' stories. If these had been given to me written by someone I'd never heard of, I would have gone, these are fantastic. These are really great. They are absolutely complete. Characters are walking around the streets of Sydney. The stories are engaging, and they're short stories, which are even harder than novels, really. So, Brian, fantastic. I'm in awe. Beautifully written. Where did this
Hold on a minute, James.
What?
Before we go any further
Yes.
on this, is this because one of the characters in my stories listens to James Valentine in the afternoon?
Look, that is a character trait that I've done in mine. And it is true. There's a criminal character who, on a kind of a stake out of a brothel, listens to my program, which is apt, I think, perfectly suitable. And I did love it. And it's sort of like, there is no greater tribute. I'm just like, that's it. Die happy. I'm leaving afternoons now. I'll go to breakfast. I'm done.
Yeah.
I went with that. But no, it's not just that. That was a beautiful thing, and I would have loved that. Just whatever the quality, the quality is just. It's like Sam Neill says in the intro. He says, Sam writes a little blurb, and he says, friend of many decades, marvelous man, beautiful character, has written a magnificent set of stories. I'm baffled and furious. Where does it come from? Where have these come from? What part of you has given birth to this?
Bloody good question.
Thank you.
Look, I've been in the storytelling game for 40, 50 years now. I guess That's what I realised. I think one of the things is, as an actor, you know, you think, okay, what am I playing? What character am I playing in this? Do I? But and so you tend to think that's all that you're involved in. What is that character doing? But I've always been someone that like read the story that they've asked me to be in and gone, well, what do I think of the story? Okay, now where does my character? How does my character contribute to this story? And can I play that character that will be contributing? So I think the fact that and I've only just realised that I've been a storyteller for a long time, and the story's been interesting. I have to go back to when I was at school, and when I was at school, I hated English. Couldn't connect with English in any way or form. Right? I like mathematics and Latin. And you know, like, I was an intellectual, but English I couldn't get. English just didn't grab me. I couldn't engage with it. Shakespeare, you know, Romeo, where art thou, and all that. You know, I just figured, you know, why doesn't he just say, hey, you want to come down and have a kiss and a cuddle? You know, and things like Great Expectations, stories like that were of a world that there was no way was a part of what I engaged in, what my life was. My life was out in the western suburbs of Sydney, where I ran in the swamps, played cricket in the street, climbed fences, had gang meetings up in the roof. That was when we were 6 and 7. So, you know, English poetry, no, didn't connect in any way. So English was nothing that meant to me. Mum had little golden books that she sometimes read to us, I remember that. But my mother was a single parent mother, bringing up my sister and I in the western suburbs of Sydney on her own. And so there wasn't time for a lot of sitting around reading and that sort of thing. She was a pianist, and that's probably the art side of it. But I couldn't connect with English. And it only happened that when I was lucky enough to get involved in an amateur theatre when I was 21, that I started to read plays. And at that stage, the Angry Brigade was going in London with Peter Nichols, John Osborne, and all that. And so I was reading these plays, and that opened my mind to another world, which is what books do to you. And then when I decided I'd go to England to become an actor, I bought a book at the airport, and it was called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by Byran, which was a historical novel on the history of the American Indian, which was a fascinating book to read while I was in the back of a van travelling around Europe. And that was the first book I bought, and I was 25, and I engaged with that. And then, of course, what happens, I become an actor, and all I spend 40 years is reading scripts, reading books, you know, working with writers. And so for 40 years I've been involved with the act of storytelling. Yeah. And I think where this came from, I think this came from all of that. A loving of telling stories that I didn't realise that I had. And all I see with what I've done now is just find another form to tell stories.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happened. Yeah. It also.
Oh, not my show, apparently.
Now go.
No, you're on a roll.
You're throwing me now. You go.
But okay, so what I was thinking was, a lot of actors would say that, and a lot of actors might be able to pitch a story, and they might be able to say, I've got this great idea, but you've crafted short stories as good as anybody else can craft a short story. That's the leap that I'm interested in.
Well, my daughter Matilda, who's here with me, someone asked her about the way her father writes, and she said, have you read his texts?
Is that right? Is that text and emails? Same. Yeah.
Look, well, you know what it's like. I mean, for me, everything's instinctive. You know, like as an actor, I didn't go to drama school, I wouldn't have lasted. It's like either my instincts tell me which way to go on things, and I think with the writing, how this started was I was watching CNN one evening, and there was this celebratory dinner in Hong Kong with men and women of my age, and they'd just been all released. They didn't know each other. They'd all just been released from jail. in Hong Kong, and the judge had said to them, "You're not drug mules, you're stupid." And they'd all got involved in scams. They'd all been, you know, like, they were vulnerable, and they'd answered scams which had led to them carrying things that they didn't know they were carrying, and ended up in jail. And I looked at that, and I thought, if I was one of those men or women, I would want to know who was behind this. And I thought, that's a very good idea for a series. So I think I'd better I'll write a little bit of what my pitch would be to a company about this. So I started to write who this bloke would be, a bloke called Frank Testy, who swims from North to South Bondi every day. And I made him my character, and then I started his journey of where he would go. And I get to, you know, a few thousand words, and I think, well, okay, now I can go and pitch it. And then I think, no, I just want him to tell me more about his life and how this works out. And then eventually it was 13,500 words, and it was a full story. And Jenny Byrne read it.
Yeah.
And Jenny Byrne from the book show, and Jenny Byrne went, "Brian, this is a really good story. Have you got any more?" So I started I was driving the car one day, and I was thinking about my mate Sam Neill, and I thought, what if Sam Neill was a thief? And of course, you know, like, he's too lazy to be a thief. But I had this thing of, like, Sam the Thief, just the name, Sam the Thief. Who is Sam, and why is he a thief? And I started to write a story about a young bloke called Sam in Campbelltown, and what his story was, and why he was a thief, and what thiefdom led to. So I sort of just got on this.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that you broke kind of the habit of a lifetime. Because as you said, you started thinking about this as a pitch, you saw a TV series, that's been your environment, that's been your world, and then suddenly something stopped you. You wanted to keep writing. Were you enjoying the writing?
I was enjoying telling the story. And I think what it was like, it was giving me an opportunity to go back over my life, and particularly my early life, of the young men and women that I'd come across growing up, and where they had faced a moral dilemma, where if they took this little step here, maybe that's okay, but then if they took another little step, they could be on a downward spiral into crime. And I think young men and women, growing up like I did, you know, quite free and you know, like everything's an adventure. Everything in life's an adventure. You know, even knocking off a Mars bar from the greengrocer's shop down the corner, you know, was an adventure. But it was also morally wrong. But it was more an adventure than morally wrong at that stage. But if then someone else said to them, "Hey, listen, there's a lawnmower in that bloke's backyard, and he's away for the weekend. Let's knock that off, and we can get $20 for it at the pub." That's now another step that the person. It's an adventure, but it's another step into a downward spiral. And I saw this sort of thing happen, not all the time, but I saw different men and women growing up who would be on that edge. So it gave me the opportunity to explore that thing where you're suddenly faced with a choice, and the choice you make can be a very, very dark life for you.
But again, you've done a very writerly thing, and not the normal thing. The normal thing then would have been to a series of stories set in 1950s, 60s Blacktown. You know, like, it's in the Western Suburbs. It's got a lovely nostalgic glow to it. We're talking about lovable rogues and thieves of that era. This is very modern. You've taken that essential thing and put it into modern Sydney.
Well, I'm a very modern man, Joe.
That's true. Yeah.
I get what you mean.
The more normal thing for people in your position and experience is the memoir, or possibly the nostalgic, fiction or something like that. To make modern, sharp short stories, there's not many that have done it.
Well, I think you know why I think that you say that is I like all these characters. You know, they live for me right at that moment that I'm writing for them. And I like all these boys and girls. I like them, but I can go, wow, you've made bad mistakes and now you're into an area where I don't like you. But I like them because they are any of us when we're young. And in most of the things, I think what I'm exploring there, and I'm unaware of that, and I could be, completely pulling my foot here, but I think what I'm exploring is the fact that when you haven't got someone there to help you as a young person, you can get into a lot of strife.
Yeah.
And I think that's contemporary, that's not the 50s, the 60s, or anything, that's now and in the future and all the time. That is modern, being without help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you research?
What?
Did you research? Did you? I would tend to have the same reaction. Preparation, not my strong point. But
If I'd have researched them, there probably would have been adjectives in my book. No, I did on the story that I was just mentioning to you about the people that got caught with scams. I did get in touch with the New South Police Fraud Squad and asked them about this sort of thing, and it was quite interesting. They told me a couple of things. One of the things they told me was there was a doctor in the North Shore who had an intelligent man who had been scammed up to $2 million that he'd laid out with this relationship that he's had. There was another story they told me was there was a lady in the western suburbs who was so good at it, within one phone call she could have the person putting $1,500, $2,000 in her bank account. She was that good at making that person feel like they now had a relationship with her. So, and the big thing was that the police always told me was the vulnerability of the people that got scammed. They had lost partners, whatever. But in most cases, something had happened that was traumatic to them, and they were lonely, and they were vulnerable. I went down and then spoke to the federal police in Canberra, and it was much the same thing that they were telling me there. And they also said, look, we'd love you to write a story about it because that helps people perhaps think twice about that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I did that sort of research. The other research, like I was talking when I just been shooting a show up in Queensland, and the bloke who was my stand-in up there was an ex-cop. He'd been a cop for 37 years. Lovely bloke. I thought he was a school teacher. He was so humble and gentle and everything. And that's how good the cops are. But he said to me, a few of my mates have read this, cop mates have read this, and they all said to me, Brian's got to have some inside knowledge. The only inside knowledge I had was that I'd lived. The stuff wasn't hard to, it's not hard to know how to make a mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did those sort of themes emerge as the stories emerge? So you're not starting with that sort of premise as such. The stories are starting to, you're following the character, you're following, and then now we're looking back at it and saying, so this is interesting. That's what I've been talking about.
Yeah, no, I did. I like with the one about the man wanting to find out who was behind the scam. I knew. Therefore, an ending had to be that he'd find out who that person was. So that was something I knew a beginning and an end to, but I didn't know what the journey of the person was. Because what I took it was like, okay, that's me. Where do I start? I'm trying to find out who was behind the scam. How do I find that out? What can possibly be my first step? So they were very good questions to ask of myself, and in answering them, the stories kept going. But usually, like with Sam the Thief, I'd go, I've got a bloke called Sam, and I've got a thief. What's his story? Mm-hmm. And Sam would start to tell me the story, and I'd follow it. Yeah,
because it's not. I'm thinking also what you've been describing so far is several of the stories, but then there's the guy who rips off the car that's got a boot full of coke, and then what does he do about that? There's the very moving story of Ahmed, who helps an addict, a junkie sex worker, and how that follows. I mean, again, these are not sort of. These are very contemporary kind of tales. And they're different sort of mistakes than the kind of ones that we might be thinking of as being typical.
Well, the Ahmed, who's an undercover cop, who was an undercover cop. I mean, Ahmed came from the fact that I wanted, the word vigilante came into my mind at one stage, and I went, I want to write a story about a vigilante. But what is a vigilante? It's someone that sees a wrong and they want to right it in some way, but they're not the law. So who's that going to be? And you just come up with, you just start. What if it's this bloke? You will also notice that in that story, the greatest rugby league side ever, the Dragons, is mentioned.
Oh, so you only mention the things you really admire in your books. Is that it?
I get the chance to put down all the things I like, and I give South such a rubbish.
Hate the bunnies. You just keep saying, hate the bunnies.
Hate the bunnies. I love hate. Yeah. In sport, it's the best thing to sit down on Friday night and go, I hope they cream them.
So this makes sense, doesn't it? Like, you had a life steeped in story, so when you start to try to tell a story, you know what a story is. Like you say, well, I know he's got to find out at the end what happened, so how do I get there? You understand the nature of a story.
No.
I understand the nature of the person. I think I understand the spirit of the person, and I want to see how that spirit lives. Because they're all very different, the different men and women, and in truth, they're mainly stories about blokes. But the women have a huge part on their lives in the story. But I want. Each of us has a spirit. We're also. Like, I just spent 2 weeks in hotel quarantine in Queensland. Where after I did, a job for 15 weeks, I can't tell you how glad I am to be out of Queensland. But I had to do 2 weeks quarantine, and I decided to take it on as a sociological experiment. So at the end of each day, I'd say, how you going, right? I'd go, not bad. Okay, got through the day, okay. So, and then I started to, and you couldn't go outside your room. So you look through your window, and I started to observe us walking down the street. We all walk differently. Some people will take a long time to put a piece of paper in a bin. They'll just check that is the piece of paper that they want to put in the bin. Someone else will just go like that. Someone will stop and go, is anyone looking? Struggle on the ground, can't find a bin. And I'm watching one time, I'm looking out the window, and about 150 metres away, there's a block of flats with an outdoor stairway. And I look, and there's a man, it's about 5:30 at night, there's a man standing at the top, it's about a 4-storey building. At the top stairs, there's a man standing there, in a suit. And I couldn't make out his face or anything, he was too far away, but he was just standing there. And he's standing there, and I'm looking, and 10 minutes goes past, about 12, 15, and I look away for a minute, and then I come back and he's gone. And I think, what was that all about? Why was he standing on the stairway? So the next day, I happened to be looking out there at midday or something, and in the same spot, there's 2 blokes in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt standing there. And I can see what they're doing. They're having a cigarette. Not allowed to smoke inside. That bloke had come home from work and, probably said, I'm going out onto the balcony to have a cigarette. So, I found myself observing us in a way that I hadn't done before. And it was absolutely, incredulous. Like, we're so different. We're so different. We think that we're alike. The only thing that binds us is that we understand humanness. We have pain, we have love, we have the same needs, all those things, and I guess that's what the pandemic in a way has taught us. But, the clothes we wear are all different. The way we walk's different. The way we do our hair's different. All those things are different. And so I got the opportunity to observe that, and I found it quite fascinating. And then when I got out of quarantine, the first day I went for a walk on Broadbeach, and, loads of people walking down the beach, and I couldn't help but stare at people. I couldn't stop staring at how the faces were, because I'd now become obsessed with how different we were. And I'm looking at people as they go past, and they're sort of like, Jesus.
That guy looks creepily like Brian Brown, and he's bloody weird.
Yeah, he's a worry. And the sizes, we're big and little, and we carry weight, we don't carry weight, all this sort of thing. And that was, carried through to me. Like, I'd taken us for granted. I'd seen all the outside things about us forever.
Did you go to the next step and then start to go, I reckon you're a retired accountant and she's a date? Like, did you start to do that?
No, that's really stupid. No, I didn't. But I got to say, 3 or 4 days later, I was just seeing the clothes, and I'd gone back to taking everything for granted. So the thing for me with the stories is detail. Like those things in my life, those little things in our life the thing I remember most in my life are the things where I feel guilty about. As a kid, maybe being in a fight with a bloke that there's no question that I was stronger than that boy. So why was I fighting him? Yeah. Where I might have said something nasty to someone one day. What? And years later you think, why did you behave like that? That's not the bloke you wanted to be. But you didn't. That was part of you growing up and learning things. And so I wanted to go back in this book, in these stories, and how have we about the little things in our lives that we remember. And all of you out there, I bet there's things where you go, oh, that day with that girl at school, where I ate her lunch. I mean, we all have those things that happen to us. And so I wanted the chance to journey through all that stuff too with my characters.
You said before, like, we're starting to want to write a story about a vigilante. Are you starting to think like a writer? Are you starting to sort of see things like, I want to write this, I want to explore that in writing now?
I think I've done that for a long time. I think I've done that in the game that I'm in, which is, because I do produce, and I recently produced a movie called Palm Beach, which I know a number of you here. That movie was made beautiful. But that was a story that came from, we were in Wales at a friend's place for Christmas, Rachel and I, and we were with 3 other couples. And one of the couples was a gentleman, a mate of mine, Italian, lived in England for a long time, had a very, very good big business, which he just sold for a lot of money, and he was bumping into walls. He didn't know who he was. He'd lost all sense of purpose. And this was a very accomplished man. Another mate had been an alcoholic all his life, and so he'd go stop at the times and stuff. And, the realisation of what that had done to the family. I'd just gone through a period of anxiety for 6 months that had happened to me. I'd never known and understood that before in my life, and it had happened to me. I'd been overseas, and I got sick, and about 20 years before I got sick, and so I built up this thing about travelling, that maybe I could end up somewhere where it wouldn't be a good hospital to look after me, and that muscle that got built up. So I'd gone to see a psychologist to find out what was wrong with me, and so I'd been coming out of that. And here we were all having, and people that had, we'd all been in our own way successful in certain things that we'd done, and here we were all struggling. And I came away from that and I said to Rachel, look, if that's happening to us, it's happening to people all the time, all over the place. Let's tell a story. I want to examine a story that's about that. And so that led to, and so then worked with a writer, putting up ideas. So that's telling a story. So I've been doing it for a long time.
Did you develop a sort of writer practice around this, where you were sort of up at dawn and doing 1,000 words?
No. I don't have the disciplines of a writer. I have the disciplines of an actor. No, I do it like I think, okay, Brian, let's go and write another 1,000 words on that story. And I go upstairs and suddenly it'll be 1,500 words, to sit there for 3 hours isn't something I could do. I think I sat there for 2 hours one day or something. Right. But I'd go back to it. I'd want to finish the story. And then I'd start another one. And so I don't have that discipline.
You think about it all the time? It'd be there.
I'm thinking about it. Like I think stories all the time. In truth, I mean, because I always want to know how people start their jobs or how they get jobs. I really love to know people's journey to where we are. Like every single person you come across has got a story that's different to someone else's, and it's intriguing to know what people's stories are. So, you know, like, that's sort of my motivation is I think about a story. I mean, I grew up going like, if there's a bully at the end of the street, you better have a bloody good story that makes him laugh so he doesn't beat you up. You know, you use stories in your life to accomplish things, you know, and so it was just you know, like, you know, I've always been full of it. You know,
that's right. You're also driven by, like, I've been thinking about this in another context, but curiosity is a really great thing to have, isn't it? Like, it keeps on driving you, keep on asking questions. Like, I think we are going to take some questions from you in a couple of minutes as well. So if you've, you know, if there's something we haven't touched on, there's something you're curious about, you know, anything at all, stick a hand up. We'll work across the room sort of geographically. So I'll sort of start over here. We've got some microphones.
Could I just tell you one story, because I'm up here and I've done films and stuff like that. One story about a film that I did, just to you know, just to entertain you. So I get a phone call. I'd just taken my daughters to, we've gone to Lord Howe Island. I get a phone call when I'm on Lord Howe Island from my American agent. He says, Brian, they're making this film called Gorillas in the Mist. And he said, they want it, it's with Michael Apted's directing it, and Sigourney Weaver was playing Deanne Fossey, who looked after the gorillas there. And they're interested in you playing the man that lived with her up in the mountain. So I flew to London the next day and met with Sigourney and Michael, and we talked and read a little bit of stuff, and then at the end of it, I said to Michael, so am I doing this or what? And he said, well, hold on, I'll talk to Sigourney. Sigourney, you want Brian to do it? She said, yeah, that's fine. So Michael said, well, you better go down to the production office and find out the dates and everything. So I go down to the production office, and I say to them, so, you know, when do you want me back here in London? And they said, oh, no, we're not in London. You'll fly into Kenya, and then you'll go up to Rwanda. And I said, oh, right, okay. Because I'd seen a movie called Greystoke, which was about Tarzan, and it was shot in Pinewood in London, and everyone was dressed in monkey suits. So anyway, I think, oh, that's all right, yeah, we go to Kenya, that's going to make it a much better movie, really good, really authentic now. So eventually I fly out to Kenya, and then to Rwanda, and then they said, I go and talk to the lady that dresses us all, and we talk about what I might wear and all that stuff. Anyway, and they say, the next day they say, okay, we're going up to the gorillas now. And I say, we're going to the what? And they say, we're going to the gorillas. I go, what, the real gorillas? And they said, yeah, the real gorillas. And I thought, hey, that's good, that'll make it more authentic. Good. So there's about 400 porters carrying our stuff. And we walk up the side of the mountain for about 3 hours. And we get to a spot, and the two trackers come out, and they go, okay, they're in there about 100 metres. So everyone puts everything down, and about 20 of us go in to about 50 metres, and then do the makeup and what we're wearing and all that. And then they say, okay, now only 4 of you can go in to be with the gorillas. That's Sigourney and myself, and a cinematographer and the focus puller. Not even Michael Apted, the director, could go. And we'll shoot whatever we can get with them. So the porters, or not the porters, the blokes that are in charge, they've got guns over their shoulders and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, you're thinking, okay, so we're going in now to the gorillas. All right, that's good. Got these 2 blokes with guns and everything. And so we start to go off, and the 2 blokes with the guns are just standing there, and there's a bloke that's got a little pencil and paper, a little notebook, and he used to work with Deanne Fossey. And I say to him, so why aren't the other blokes coming? And they said, oh no, you can't have any guns in here. And I said, well, who's coming with the 4 of us? And he said, oh, I am. And he's got a pencil and paper, and thinking, what, when the gorilla attacks me, he's going to stab it in the eye with a pencil or something. So then we take off, we start walking to where the gorillas are. Now the thing with the gorillas, there's about 20 of them. There's a silverback, and there's females and males and the little one. And they said, now, everything will be all right. All you've got to do is make sure you're submissive. Don't look the big gorilla in the eye or anything like that, and don't do anything with the little ones. You know, and you're thinking, right, there's a lot of things I've got to think about. and so now we start walking up the mountain, and then all of a sudden someone goes, there, look. And at about the back of that wall there's a massive tree. And there's this black head comes around. Big, powerful black head. A power that I've never seen in my life. And I guess you can only say it's like seeing God. It's so beyond anything you can imagine. With these deep eyes that seem to go on forever. I remember thinking, that's a gorilla. I'm going to walk into 20 of them. Right? Oh well, let's go. So we then walk up, all the gorillas stop, and I'm playing a cameraman. And so I've got a camera with me. So we stopped and they set up and they said, okay, Brian, now in you go, move amongst them. And I'm like, okay, I'm an actor, I'm getting paid for this. And I walk in amongst them with my camera and I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for that big paw to come on here, the other one to rip my head off, to hurl me off the mountain. And tomorrow in the paper, I knew that it'd go, Australian actor has head ripped off shoulder and thrown off mountain. Never happened before. And that didn't happen. It didn't happen. And I moved amongst them, and I photographed them, and they didn't want to know me. I mean, they don't eat meat, so you're not prey. And I moved amongst them for a good 40 minutes. And then at the end of it, we came down, and then someone said to me, so what was it like? And you know, there wasn't a word. There wasn't a word that described the fact that you were relieved for not being killed, that you were thrilled by being with these extraordinary wild creatures, that what you observed between them in their relationships with each other. There wasn't a word, you know, that doesn't exist in the English language, the word. And it was, you know, and people say to me like, what have you enjoyed doing in your life, in your film life and that? You know, I have to say that when I was a little kid growing up in Penania, if someone had said to me, when you turn 40, you're going to be, where do you think you'll turn 40? If I had said on the moon, that would have made more sense because we'd sent a man to the moon. But nowhere in my life would I have said on top of a mountain in Africa called Rwanda, surrounded by 40 gorillas. And that's how strange life is.
I mean, that's the storyteller. That's what the stories are like. They're that direct, they're that good, they're that, you know, they're that beautifully observed. Absolutely fantastic. Byran, ladies and gentlemen. Author. Stick a hand up over here if you've got a question. Judy's got the roving mic, and we'll have to get you talking to Brian. We've got one there. Hi there, what's your name? That's you. Yes. Hetty? Hello.
Brian, fantastic. Do any of your characters ever surprise you? Like you're going in a direction and you think you know what this character is going to do, but do they actually surprise you and go in a different direction?
That's a good question. Do you mean as a writer?
Yeah. You think you know what this character
Yeah, that's a
will do.
good question. Do they surprise me? I think they surprise me all the time because I have no idea where the story is going to go. So I think I'm always surprised by the... it's never a big surprise. It's just a little surprise. Like, you know, with Sam the thief, you know, he's been down the pub with his mates. His car, the battery's gone, so he has to walk home. Walking home, suddenly there's a bloke jumps out of his car, goes to see a mate, he walks past, he sees the keys are in the car, and he goes, bugger it, I'm going to drive home. Jumps in and runs off that bloke's car, and then he opens the boot, and there's something in the boot that he would never have believed, and so on goes the journey. But the little, you know, like, we've all gone like, oh, I better not drive. We've all gone, oh, I've got to walk home. You know, those things are the little, and they're the little surprises when I go, oh, I'll put him in the pub. Oh, now I'll put him walking home. I mean, they're all the surprise. I don't know what they're going to do until I write it down.
Yeah. So you're not, in that sort of story, you're not necessarily planning where he's going to go. You don't know. You know that he'll find this, but then you're not quite sure what he'll do. Will he just give it up? Will he try and keep it? Will he try and sell it?
Yeah. The what ifs.
Yeah. I interviewed his name's Vince, and I'm forgetting his last name, who did Breaking Bad, who wrote him. And he said that they would just write to a cliffhanger. So, go home, come back the next day. All right, how are we going to get him out of there?
And that's the fun of it.
Yeah.
Going to somewhere that is really difficult, and like, there's an answer to everything.
Yeah,
you know.
exactly. Yes, you go. Hello.
Oh, hi. Brian, that's amazing. I just wondered, you had another career as well, or you could have had another career. You wouldn't remember this, but in the 80s or 90s at a charity function, you were just such a gentleman and a weightlifter. It was pouring with rain and the loo was outside, and you actually carried a bunch of girls, including me, and I'm not tiny, to the loo and back to stop our feet being absolutely and our shoes being ruined.
I didn't know toilet porter was a career. Did you?
How old were they?
The shoes were brand new and very expensive. The girls were probably 30s, 40s then.
Yeah, well, no wonder I carried them.
And me.
Did you think it's sort of like up until that moment when you do the amateur show? Like, what's 18 to 19-year-old Brian Brown thinking about doing?
I was studying to be an actuary at the AMP Society, which is a mathematician. They didn't have them at university. You couldn't study at university, you had to do it by correspondence from London or Edinburgh. And the AMP gave me a scholarship there, and I worked for them and all that, and got paid. But, you know, Brian Brown was playing rugby league on a Sunday. He was going down the pub on a Friday night with his mates, trying to chat up girls who didn't want to know him. You know, all the normal things of just growing up, you know.
Did you see yourself just as married bloke with the suburbs eventually?
No, and it's quite interesting that, because I remember at one stage, it was a terrible thing to say to my mother. We were driving along in a car one time, Mum said something about getting married. And I said, well, there's no way I'll be getting married. And she said, why? I said, well, look, you know, I come from a broken home, you know, and that was a horrible thing to say to my mother. And my sister said the same thing. She said, yeah, probably, I'm probably the same, you know. Well, as it happens, we both got married, we both had 3 kids, and, you know, now I got grandchildren, so, you know, but once again, it's like those things I was talking about, the things you might say that you don't think about, you know. The only thing that the thing that I'm sure everybody in this room would love to do, and it's the one thing I would love to do, I just want 10 minutes with my mother to say, listen, thanks.
Yeah.
You know, and I ain't gonna get it. I ain't gonna get it.
Yeah. Hand up. Any other further Judy's wandering around there? Have we got somebody? Here we go, over there. Terrific. Good on you. That's an enthusiastic look, isn't it? He's not carrying people to the toilet today, okay? That's a past thing. Yes, off you go.
Hi, Brian. What would be some advice for young writers wanting to start stories?
He's not a young writer, can I
Oh, young writers.
Do you mean new young writers?
Aspiring writers.
Because as a new old writer,
Yeah, what's the road?
to a new young writer, I would say the only thing, and it's like the game, not anything, with acting and whatever. If you want to do it, you just got to hang in there as long as you can to where you go, I can't do it anymore if you don't want to do it. But the thing is, you've got to shove yourself in front of people. You've got to write your stuff and put it out to someone. Look, it's a bit, it's not very nice of me, but I did not set out to be a writer and have stories in a book. I'm incredibly grateful that this has happened to me. I did 3 years ago, if someone said I'd have a book out with stories in it, I'd have laughed at them. There was no way that could be the case. But I started to do something and I got support and people saying, keep it up. That's very necessary. And that's why you've got to show people things. You know, and sometimes it hurts what they say, but you've got to be ready for that stuff. You've got to be ready for the knockback. I'll tell you, I'll tell you what I've told all my kids about, you know, I got this from being a salesman, is that you're going to get a lot of no's in your life, right? You're going to get a lot of no's. But as a salesman, you learn that, okay, you want to sell 2 things. You've got to make 100 phone calls, of which 10 people will say, come and see me, and 2 out of those 10 will buy it. That's your statistic. So when you're in anything, you go, I'm going to get no's. But what I learnt was, whenever someone said no, I'd go, ripper, got that out of the road. I'm getting closer to the yes. And that's the way I look upon stuff.
I think you also said something very fundamental about writing as well, as you were talking about it, which is start with character, ask yourself questions. You know, like that's a really simple but a very effective approach. And a lot of people, when they attempt to write, they're trying to think of the big story, or they're seeing the published book, or they're seeing some grand kind of thing they're trying to explore. I might be talking about my own mistakes here, but like I think your thing of saying, here's Frank, he's been ripped off, what happens to him? Like those simple sort of questions will often deliver the story.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. Let's see what the character's going to tell me is the answer.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, Jude.
Hello, thank you, Brian and James. This is terrific. I just wanted to ask you, Brian, what prompted you to write a novel a series of short stories, as opposed to a screenplay, which obviously you have access to making actually turn into films? What is it? A case of another feather in your bow of having a book produced? Just wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've never written a screenplay. Screenplays are really hard. Really very difficult. I mean, I appreciate good screenwriters enormously. It's a very, very different thing to write. For me, writing these short stories was how I talk. I can tell a story. In a screenplay, you're just doing a little snippet of a scene that's meant to give you a great insight or something to a character, and then there'll be other scenes that all add up. I don't think I'm capable of that, and in fact I don't want to do that. It doesn't work with my nature to do that. My nature is to rattle on, and so my characters rattle on.
How do you see these filmically? Like the story of Frank and the ripoff seems to me the most obvious film, the most obvious sort of one I can see a feature film out of that. Do you see them cinematically, do you think? Because a lot of writers will also, when they're not as steeped in cinema as you are, will say, oh, I think very cinematically.
Yeah, no, well, the one about Frank, the scam, I mean, I started that journey because I thought it would be a good pitch for an 8-hour series. And in fact, I am developing that with Bunya Productions, who do all the Mystery Roads, and I did Sweet Country with it a couple of years ago. So I am developing that. A number of the other stories, when I look at them, I go, well, they're all sort of stories for television or film. Maybe that's the game I'm in, so I write like that. But I'm not anxious to do that. I want them to live in their own. I want to enjoy this fact that it's different to what I normally do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too often with writing, people see all the successes that somebody made it into a film, which is sometimes an unfortunate kind of compliment, really. The book was great to begin with, it didn't need another medium to explore it.
Yeah. No. Look, it's very enjoyable to have. I mean, when I see it says Brian Brown, Sweet Jimmy, I go, are you fair income?
Yeah.
Like it's strange.
Yeah.
We have time for one last question.
Okay.
Do gorillas talk?
Sorry? I just missed that. Can you say it again?
Gorillas talk.
Oh, do gorillas talk?
I'm trying to think of the sounds. They get excited. They get excited if they see another bunch of gorillas that isn't of their group, and they'll stand off opposite each, like one, say there's something down that end of the room, and then they come across another group here. There'll be a standoff, and there'll be noises going through, either noises to that group to sort of back off. So I guess, and within themselves there'll be little grunts and whatever. So I would imagine they communicate, whether it's talk or whether it's, but yes, they definitely communicate. And the thing that's absolutely wonderful about them, it's just the same as us with our kids, particularly the little ones. They jump all over them, they jump on their father's head, they muck around with them, and of course we were told, don't do anything with the little ones. So of course you go in there, and the little ones, all they want to do is jump all over you, and you're like, no, I don't want to know you, I don't want my head lifted off my shoulders. But yeah, there's lots of communication that goes on. Yeah.
Well, Well, there's been lots of good communication here today. I think it's been a fantastic conversation. I've loved it. So great to see so many of you out. So great to be out in such numbers. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming. A big round of applause for Byran Brown.
James Valentine. Thank you.
Thank you on behalf of the Women's Weekly Lunch, James and Brian, for fascinating so thank you very much. Big round of applause again for James Valentine. And Brian will be signing copies of his book outside in the lobby after the lunch.
Insane not to go and get copies. By 6, Christmas is coming up.